Narcissistic abuse recovery. How does understanding that narcissists are stuck in the paranoid schizoid position relate to borderline personality disorder and autism? All this sounds a lot like BPD and also autism, regarding the no sense of self, BPD and mirroring of autism. Hi and welcome back. Now, I read somewhere that BPD has a rather high heritability rate, but that doesn't mean it's entirely genetic, whereas autism is. Inherently, autism appears to be some kind of metabolic change that's as a result of various gene mutations that cause specific changes that result in these differences in the way that the BH4 metabolic pathway actually works. This leads to a number of changes during the time that the baby is actually growing in the womb, and one of those is higher than normal glutamate levels, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter. One of the other things that this leads to is a lack of neural pruning. Now, what's that? That's where the sort of parts of a dendrite, if you know what that is, on a brain cell, that are not used too much are pruned off, so that the information that is like superfluous or unuseful to a person is removed, whereas it tends to stay in the autistic brain. This is why when they remove our brains after we've gone, our brains tend to weigh more than neurotypicals. So, autism is genetic, and it's metabolic, and it's neurophysiological and neurodevelopmental. It's got nothing inherently to do with attachment. Autism has nothing to do with how the mother treated the baby. It's not something that's a result of some kind of emotional programming. It's there inherent in the genes. And another factor with autism is that it never goes away. There's nothing you can do to take it out, to have the symptoms go into remission. But because of the higher than normal glutamate levels and lack of neural pruning, then this means that autistics are prone to meltdowns and more sensitive to things like trauma. A lifetime of carrying trauma as an autistic can actually be really, really harrowing, and it can lead to all sorts of horrible things like unaliving. But I can tell you, as an autistic who's processed through loads of trauma, things get easier when you're not carrying trauma. I'm still very much autistic and very much ADHD actually, but yeah, I have a quieter mind and a very quiet nervous system, and neither of those things means that I'm not autistic and I'm not ADHD. I've helped way too many autistics and ADHDers and ADHDers reach the same place that I have, so there you go. Anyway, what about BPD? So you'll notice I didn't mention the paranoid schizoid position in relation to autism or ADHD. It's because it's got nothing to do with either. Autistics and ADHDers don't have this inherent reliance on primitive ego defenses, or at least not in any particularly patterned way. Whereas those with borderline personality disorder, it's in a very patterned way. None of this is a judgment. This is not having a go at all. This is a set of descriptions that I've read and seem to match up with literature. I've also been on the business end of the symptoms from people that have borderline personality disorder. And yeah, again, it all seems to match up. Again, no judgment. So, unlike a narcissist, people with borderline personality disorder seem to have a very unstable sense of self. They do have a self, I think, but it's just very unstable. To a very large degree, they appear to have the condition because of extreme abuse in childhood and neglect too. Adolf Stern in 1938 coined the term borderline to describe someone who appeared to be in his ward or people between neurosis and psychosis. So people with borderline personality disorder will sometimes hallucinate, auditory and visual, it could be anything really, which means that sometimes they're given antipsychotics. You might notice that antipsychotics are not a standard treatment for people with autism. Now, this comment was actually in reference to me talking about the paranoid schizoid position, so let's get into that. In Melanie Klein's theory, there are two positions in childhood. There's 0 to 6 months, which is the paranoid schizoid position, which evolves into the depressive position. The evolution from the paranoid schizoid position into the depressive position involves the building of effective empathy. And people with borderline personality disorder mostly do seem to have effective empathy. This means that they're not fully stuck in the paranoid schizoid position. They're, again, somewhere on the borderline between the paranoid schizoid position and the depressive position. How else do I know this? because the depressive position is the place where complex human emotions are grown, and they do seem to have guilt, which is the first complex human emotion to be born. Now, this means that at times someone with BPD, with borderline personality disorder, can slip back into the paranoid schizoid position altogether, and this can be what is known as splitting behavior. Usually what is said to cause this is real or perceived rejection. The person then sees that, feels these emotions of possible rejection, and they revert to the paranoid schizoid position, and now they're in the all good, all bad realm. And what are at the two ends of this all good, all bad realm? Idealization, devaluation. Got it? Usually then what happens is they go through the relationship going through rapid cycles of idealization and devaluation. Back and forth, back and forth. So the attachment between themselves and the person they are with is very, very fragile. But this is not because of the other person's sense of self, necessarily. If they're neurotypical, it's got nothing to do with them. This is all to do with the arrangement of the psyche of the person with borderline personality disorder. And that's not their fault. Now, I'm talking about the things that aren't usually talked about when it comes to BPD. Most people talk about things like emotional dysregulation and, disorganized sense of self and things like this, and will liken autism to BPD, but they are completely different things. Yes, I am very, very aware that comorbidity can happen. Just in case, I'm also very aware of what a calm, regulated, settled nervous system feels like, and also what a stable sense of self feels like, because that's who I am. Now, why do I say this? Because occasionally, BPDs like to check in with me and other creators, and they like to do what a narcissist does, unfortunately, because they rely on ego defenses to quite a large extent too. They like to project. Again, no judgment, just don't bother trying it, alright? Just in case. I don't know who you are. The next thing, sadly, is stalking behavior. People with borderline personality disorder seem to be prone to stalking behavior for a very good reason. They seem to develop a need to have someone in their life, which is termed the favorite person, that they fixate on and idealize, again, to stay away from bad objects and bad experiences, and they need them to regulate their sense of self. So in general, what tends to happen is there are feelings of entitlement over this person that develop, and they feel that they sort of own them. Now, because this does carry a psychosis element, the sense of reality sometimes can get a bit distorted, and they can believe that they're actually in a relationship with that person when they're in fact not. So it could lead to them believing that there are hidden messages for them from their favorite person in videos, in their poems that they put out online, or various things. Again, yeah, I've seen it. So initially the stalking behavior might seem kind of innocent, although irritating to some degree to the person that's not reciprocating the feelings. It's like someone who just wants a hell of a lot of responsiveness. They want the person to attend to them, and they feel they have a right to that. That's where things can get quite difficult, because if the person with BPD perceives any kind of rejection from their favourite person, the stalking can become nasty. They could do everything from sending very abusive messages and DMs, opening new accounts, to actually mounting smear campaigns.